Yevamos Daf we finish off the 10th parak of the Masechta with a brief discussion about at what age a person is considered to be a gadol, even if they don't have the signs of adulthood. Then the Gemara will begin the next parak Nosan al Hanusa. That begins with a discussion of situations in which there is an isser of marrying a woman and having a bia with her mother or sister. When does that bia with the mother or the sister aser the woman? A topic we've been discussing already. The Gemara will then get into a number of riddles that people ask about how is it possible to have a confusing set of relationships based on all kinds of incestuous relationships. Then we'll have another Mishnah which will discuss what happens when two brothers convert. Are they considered to be brothers as far as the halachos of Isser Eshes Ach and as far as the mitzvah of Yibam are concerned? So let's begin. We're at the two dots, a couple lines into Daf Tzad Zayin. We're going to finish off the discussion in the end of the last parak. So we had seen in our last Mishnah, it said that a person is considered to be a katan as long as he doesn't bring two hairs, the signs of adulthood, whether he's 12, 9, or 20, whatever it is. So the Gemara asks, but what do you mean? We said that when a person's 20, if he still doesn't have two hairs, he's considered to be a sris, so we consider him to be an adult already. He's not going to be bringing two hairs. Same thing applies to a woman. She's considered to be an islandess, and she's not going to be bringing two hairs. So even without simone, the signs of adulthood, he or she are considered to be an adult at age 20. Why does our Mishnah say, even age 20, they're not considered to be an adult, they're considered to be a katan, whether they're 9 or 20 if they don't have signs of adulthood. So the Gemara says the answer is that it depends if there are signs of sris, and presumably signs of islandness as well. Our Mishnah says that even at age 20 they're considered to be a child. That's because they don't have signs of sris. So you assume that they're not a sris, they just haven't matured yet. However, where the place that you're quoting is talking about where there were signs of sris, that combined with the fact that there's age 20, you consider them to be an adult and a sris, even though they don't have any signs of adulthood. Now, the Gemara says this was a case that was brought to Rava to check for signs of sris, and he said, if the person's too healthy, too well fed, that could cause the hairs to fall out. So it could be he would have signs of adulthood, they just fell out. So he shouldn't be so healthy. He should eat less and be less well fed. If he's too weak, he's not eating enough, that could also cause the signs of adulthood to fall out. So you should make sure to strengthen him up a little, and maybe you'll see those signs of adulthood. You don't have to necessarily chalk it up to being a sris. This guy apparently didn't have signs of sris, and that's why everyone was wondering what's the deal with him. Okay, that ends the parak Isha Rabbah. Now we begin parak Nosan al Anusa. The parak begins with a discussion of is there an Isser Isha Ubita and Isha Achosa on a woman who's not married to you, you just had to be with. So we know that there's halacha, you're not allowed to marry two sisters or a mother-daughter set. The question is, what if you're not marrying both of them? You just had be with one, does that aser the other? So if you had to be with a woman, does it aser her mother? Does it aser her daughter? Does it aser her sister? So the Mishnah says no. And that bia could be whether it was an anusa, whether the person raped the woman or he was mafata, he seduced her. Either way, just the fact that there was a bia, not a marriage, does not aser her sister, mother, or daughter. Now, if, however, he married the first one, then there is an isser to be ma'anes or mafata the second one, and that isser would be mechayev and carbon or kares if he married the other one first. Now, what about these relationships as it applies to his father? What about Anusas Aviv, Mefutas Aviv? Is that an Isser? We know that Eshes Aviv is an Isser. What about Anusas and Mefutas Aviv? So the Gemara says that's a Mechokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda. Tanakam says it's not Aser. It's only the wife of the father which is Aser, not the one who is Nival to his father. Rabbi Yehuda says that they are Aser. The Isser applies even to one who is Nival to his father. As far as his son, though, there's an Isser Kalaso. That's the wife of his son. That's only an actual wife. There's no Isser on the one who is Nival to his son that everyone agrees to. So the Gemara begins, the Gemara says, we've seen this halacha in the Brisa already, we've seen that the Isser Isha Ba'achosa, Isha Ubita only applies to a married woman, to the one who you're married to, not to the one to whom one was Nival. And that's because you have a Brisa that says that if a person is ma'anis a woman, he's allowed to marry her daughter, he's allowed to marry if he was ma'anes, a woman, like we say, is allowed to marry her daughter. However, if he married a woman, he's also to marry her daughter. So we have a contradictory brayso to this halacha. So brayso says that someone who's suspected of illicit behavior with a woman is usher to marry her mother, her daughter, or her sister. So if he's suspected of illicit behavior, the worst that could be is that he's guilty of illicit behavior, but he didn't marry them. So what's the reason? Why should he be usher in her mother, sister, or daughter? What could be the problem? Obviously, there is an isser, even though all he had with the first woman was a bia at worst. So Gemara says this is an issa d'Rabbanan here. We are discussing here an issa d'Oraisa. What that Bryce is referring to is that this is an issa d'Rabbanan. The reason for the issa d'Rabbanan would be that people will get confused. People will mix it up. The reason for the issa would be that we're afraid because he's rogil, because he's used to spending time with the relative. He'll do the isser again, and now it will be usser. So, meaning to say, if he was nival with a woman, and then he goes and marries that woman's mother, sister, or daughter, the one that he was nival to is now usser to him, and we're afraid he's going to do it again. And now it'll be an isser kari. So, in order to prevent that, there's an isser d'Rabbanan for him to marry that woman's mother, sister, or daughter. So the Gemara says it's an isser d'Rabbanan. So the Gemara asks, it still doesn't explain our Mishnah, which says nosin al hanus, he's allowed to marry this woman. You don't see he's allowed to marry if there's an isser d'Rabbanan. There's an isser d'Rabbanan. It's not that he's allowed to. Allowed to says he's allowed to do the chatchila. So the Gemara says it's not a kasha. Our Mishnah is talking about after the death of the original woman, after the death of the woman that he's nival to. Once she died, there's no concern he's going to go be nival to her again. So there's no isser d'Rabbanan. So all we had to prove is that there's no isser d'Oraisa. That we've proved. The brayso that says that it's usser was talking about whether there's an isser d'Rabbanan because she's still alive after she dies. The isser d'Rabbanan is over. So now the Gemara says, what's the source? How do we know this halacha that the isser only applies to a woman whom he's married to, that he's usher on her mother, sister, or daughter, not a woman that he was nival to? So the Gemara is going to give two sources. The Gemara's first source is in all the arayos, the Torah describes it as shchiva. Lo yishkav, isha shochav, hashoichev, lying with. That just talks about a bia. Lying with just refers to a bia. However, in the isser of isha and achosa, a woman and her sister, mother or daughter, there it talks about ki yikach, when he will take. When he will take, that is referring to a marriage. That's when he marries the first woman. That's where there's an isser on the second woman. So the word yikach that's used there shows that's only if there's a marriage relationship with the first woman, not if there's just a bia with the first woman. So the Gemara says, if that's correct, then I have a problem, because the word yikach is used elsewhere. It's used to describe the isser of a man to his own sister. There's no marriage involved. The man is usher to have any bia with his own sister, and it says, the word that's used there is yikach. It says, Isha yikach esachoso, bas aviv bas imo. So, according to you, that the word yikach means marriage, it's saying that it's also for him to marry his sister. That's not true. It's also for him to have any bia with his sister. So the Gemara says the word yikach, kicha, is a flexible word. In a situation where there is a possibility of marriage, it means marriage, not bia. In a situation where there's no possibility of marriage, like with one's own sister, where there is no tfisas kedushin, so there it can't be referring to marriage. So we have to conclude that it's referring to bia. But in the case where it could be referring to marriage, it does refer to marriage. Now, the Gemara is going to give its second source. So the Gemara says that the source is because it's a contradiction whether there's an isser for a man to marry his wife's granddaughter or not. So it says that one is not allowed to marry, one is not allowed to be with his own granddaughter. It says, Ervas bas bincha bas bitcha lo segale. One is usher in his own son or daughter's daughter. So that implication is that it's only if it's his own son or daughter. It's not if it's his wife's son or daughter. If it's his wife's grandson or daughter. His granddaughter is usher, his wife's granddaughter is mutter. That's the implication. However, we have a passage which clearly says that his wife's granddaughter is usher. It says, Ervas isha bita lo segala es baz benaves bas bita lo sikach. So, which is it? Contradiction if his wife's granddaughter is mutter to him or not. It must be that there is the resolution to the contradiction is one is talking about where it's his wife through marriage, one is talking about where she's not his wife through marriage, she's just someone who he had bia with. In the case where he had bia with a woman, there is no isser on her granddaughter, and the same is true for her daughter. In the case where he married a woman, he is usher to marry her granddaughter, he is usher to have bia with her granddaughter, and that's the source for this halacha. So where it says, you've proven that there are two different halachos for for his wife and his niveles. However, he didn't prove which one's which. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the isser applies to the daughter and granddaughter of the woman he was nivel to, and there's no isser to the granddaughter of the woman he's married to. Versus, no, that can't be, because arayos always go after she'er. The word she'er is used. She'er means where there's a relationship, where there's a marriage that's created, and onsin will create a situation of a bia without a marriage is not called she'er. All right, now the Gemara moves on to the next page, which was the B'chalakas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama as to what is the halacha about a person marrying a woman who was nival to his father, anusas aviv, who was not his father's wife. So the Gemara says, what is the source of Rabbi Yehuda's halacha, and what is this machlokes? How does Rabbi Yehuda know that that's aser? So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is because it says lo yikach ishes aviv lo yigal kanaf aviv. So kanaf aviv, the corner, his father's corner, means any corner that his father revealed. Any woman that his father was together with has this iser. So the Gemara says, okay, so there's some woman that his father's with who has this iser. It's including someone. How do you know it's referring to anusas aviv? Maybe it's referring to something else. So the Gemara says no, because a couple of psukim earlier we were talking about the so you have anusa, concept of rape. It says so that's what we were talking about earlier. So that's what we're talking about here. Also, kanaf aviv is referring to anusas aviv. So the Gemara says, what did the Rabbanan say? The Gemara says there was a hefsek between that pasuk and this pasuk, other topics in between, and therefore it's not what it's referring to. Kanaf aviv is including something, but it's not including anusas aviv. Kanaf aviv is including that there's an iser on shomeres yavam shel aviv. If a woman falls to his father to yibam, then he's usher to marry that woman. So Gemara says, hold on a second, that's usher already, because if this woman's falling to his father in yibam, that means that this woman was married to his father's brother. Married to his father's brother, that means he's married to his uncle. That means this is his aunt. A man is usher to marry his aunt anyway, without having anything to do with his father's shomeres yavam. Even with that, even means usher to his aunt. The Gemara says, okay, that's true. So we're adding a second law. She's usher to him because of his being his aunt. She's also usher because shomeres yavam of his father. The Gemara says, what is the third isser here? She's a Yevamos Daf. She's falling to Yibam. How could she be usher to him? How could you have a dream that she was mutter to him? So Gemara says, two answers to that. Either you're right, where now there are three lavin on this. There's Yevamos Daf, and there's also Kanaf Aviv, and there's also the fact that she's his aunt. Or we're talking about after the death of his father, so she's freed from being a Shomeres Yavam, however she's also because she was his father's Shomeres Yavam. All right, now the Gemara is going to go into an interesting list of riddles about how you could have a possible funny situation where you have a mixed jumble of relationships. So the Gemara is going to quote each riddle and then explain how it could possibly work out that way. Many of these riddles are said from the perspective of a woman who's speaking. So the first one is, a woman says, my brother from my father's side, and not from my mother's side, is my mother's husband, and I am the daughter of his wife. So what does that mean? How does that work out? So the Gemara says, this works out if you don't go like Rav Yehuda in our Mishnah. According to Rav Yehuda, a man is not allowed to marry his father's anusa. That's what happened over here. A man was ma'anis a woman, so let's say Yaakov was ma'anis a woman, and he gave birth to a daughter. That's the one who's speaking. And Yaakov had another son, Reuven. Then Reuven went and married his father's anusa, Yaakov's anusa. So the daughter says, my brother Reuven is my half-brother. She's my brother from my father. We are both children of Yaakov. He went and married my mother, and I'm the daughter of his wife. So that's how that works out. Most of the next riddles can only be found be'isser. So the first one is, a woman says, this is my brother and my son, and the one who I'm holding in my hands is, I am the sister of the one who I'm holding in my hands. So what happens is here is that there's a boy who's both her brother and her son. So how's that? So obviously that's that she had a bia with her own father, and therefore the son that she gives birth to is her half-brother. They share a father. It's her son, but it's her father's son as well, so it's her brother and her son. So that's how that situation works out. Next case, the woman says, Shalom Aleichem to my son, I am the daughter of your sister. That means that the same person is her son and her uncle. How's that possible? That's if she had bia with her grandfather. Again, this is only be'isser, so it's an akum. The Gemara says an akum had a bia with his granddaughter. The son that she gives birth to is her son, and it's also her grandfather's son, and therefore, if he has a sister from her grandfather, that could be her mother. So her mother and her son are brother and sister. The next is a very similar case, pretty much the same, except that instead of she being the daughter of her kid's sister, she's the daughter of her kid's brother. So here the riddle is spoken as follows. She says, here's a hard riddle for the workers in the field who water the fields. You have a hard riddle that fell on you. How is this possible that I say that this child that I'm carrying is my son, and I am the daughter of his brother? So how is that possible? Again, same thing. She was mizana with, again, it's be'isr, she was mizana with her grandfather. Therefore, the child that she gives birth to is her son, and it's also the brother of her father. So it's her father's father, and it's the brother of her father is her own son. The next one is really complex. A woman is complaining. She says, Oy vey, woe is to me because of my brother, who is my father, who is my husband, who is the son of my husband, who is the husband of my mother, and I am the daughter of him and this woman, and I have children, and he doesn't want to give children to my kids who are his grandchildren. How does that work out? So the Gemara says you have an Avikavim, because of course this is Be'isr, and he has bia with his mother and gives birth to this woman who's the one who's speaking. So that means that the one who's speaking is her father, because she was born from her mother and him, and it's also her brother because they share a mother. This man was, her mother, the woman who's speaking's mother. So it was his mother, and it's also her mother, so they share a mother. So it's her brother and it's her mother. Then he goes and he has bia with her, with the speaker herself, who is the daughter of his mother, who's his own sister. So now that's why he's called her husband. So far he's her brother, he's her father, he's her husband. He's also her mother's husband because he had bia with her mother. So we've got all those. Then this guy's father goes and he's bia with the speaker as well. So now he's also the son of her husband. We're not a real husband. We're considering his father to be her husband because he had to be out with her. Now that union, the old man and her has children, and therefore these are the children of the grandchildren of the original man, because the original man is her father. I'd be with her mother, and now her children are his grandchildren, and doesn't have rachmanas on them, despite all these relationships. Next, we have a woman who says to a man, you and I are siblings. I and your father are siblings. I and your mother are siblings. So I'm siblings with you, your mother, and your father. How is that possible? So Mar says again, this has to be Be'isr. So there's an Eved Kechavim who has bia with his mother, and she gives birth to two sisters, one of whom is the speaker. Then he has a bia with the other one and has a son from that other one. So the speaker is talking to that son. So the speaker says to the son, you and I are sisters because we are siblings because we both share a father. Your father is my father. Your father gave birth to you with my sister. And also I was born from him with my mother. Then your father and I are also siblings because the original man in the story had the bia with his own mother, who was also the speaker's mother. He had a bia with his mother and gave birth to the speaker. So the father, the person she's speaking to, she's saying your father and I are siblings because we share a mother. Your mother and I are also siblings because your mother and I are both born from your father, because he gave birth to both of us from his mother. So I'm siblings with all three. Now we have the last case, and this is where two men are speaking to each other. One says, you and I are the children of siblings. You and I are cousins. I and your father are the children of siblings. We're also cousins. And I and your mother are also cousins. So I'm a cousin of you, your father, and your mother. How does that work out? The Gemara says this actually works out beheter. You don't have to do any surim to get this case. You have three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Reuven gives birth to two daughters legally. Shimon goes and marries one of them, and Levi's son goes and marries the other one. Now, Shimon has a son from one of these two girls, and he's talking to Levi's grandson that was born from Levi's son to the sister. So he says, first of all, you and I are cousins because we're cousins. We're the son of siblings because I'm born from one of Reuven's two daughters, and you're born from the other one of Reuven's two daughters. So we share our mothers, our sisters. Those are Reuven's two daughters. Now I and your father are cousins because we're the children of siblings because your father is Levi. Your father is Levi's son, and I am Shimon's son. So me and your father are both are children of Shimon and Levi. Now I and your mother are also cousins because I'm Levi's son, and your mother is Reuven's daughter. So my father and your mother are Reuven and Levi, who are siblings, and therefore I'm cousins with your mother as well. All right, this concludes the Gemara with all these riddles, and now we get to the next Mishnah, which goes on to the topic of what happens when two brothers convert. Are they considered to be brothers as far as Yibum? That is, does the wife of one fall to the other? Is she considered having a brother? And are they considered to be brothers as far as the Isser Eshes Ach, or is there no Isser Eshes Ach? Those topics might be related, they might be separate, and there's might be two potential reasons why you would consider them to be brothers or not. So first of all, before they converted as Akum, do you say that Akum have brothers, or is there no yichus to the Av? Gemara will separate between the yichus, the brotherhood, whether that exists for an Akum through a father or through a mother or through both. And then there's a question of the conversion. Does the conversion make them kikata and shanola, to make them like a new person that were never there before? Now, conversion has also two steps. We have to know, did they convert if the mother converted? So did the mother convert before she became pregnant with them or before she gave birth to them? Were they conceived in Kedusha or were they born in Kedusha? So we begin the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if a woman converts and she therefore converts her children along with her two sons, there's no chalitza, no yibum, no nothing. That seems to say that api halacha they're not brothers, and there's no reason for chalitza here. Now the Mishnah is not clear if it's usher for them to do yibum or if there's just no mitzvah of yibum. That would be a question of is there an isser eshes ach or not. It could be that there's no isser eshes ach at all, or it could be that there is an isser eshes ach. So they are considered to be brothers as far as the isser, just not as far as the yibum. That's not clear, but it says no chalitza and there's no yibum. Now, the Mishnah goes a step further. The Mishnah says this is true even if 3 out of the 4 steps were done as Yisraelim. That is, the only thing that happened here, as far as these 2 sons are concerned, is that the pregnancy of the first one happened before the mother converted. That happened shelo b'kedusha. However, everything else happened b'kedusha. The first son was born b'kedusha, and the second son was both conceived and born b'kedusha. Even in a case like that, the Mishnah is clear. They're not considered brothers, and there's no yibum. You don't have any isser over here. Now the Gemara gets into a case which the Gemara is going to try to resolve based on our Mishnah, which is there an isser eshes ach or not? So the Gemara says there was a first of all, the Mishnah says the same thing applies to a shivcha that's freed. Shivcha that's freed is the same status as a woman who converts. So the Gemara says it was a case of a shivcha who was freed. She was called Yudon. Yudon, the shivcha, she was freed. She had 2 sons, and they both married women, and then I guess they both divorced them, and there was a question of them marrying each other's wives. So it would be a question of eshes ach. So the Gemara says that Rav Acha bar Yaakov said that they're permitted, meaning he held that there's no isser of eshes ach because they were converts. So Gemara says that Rav says, but Rav Sheshes said it's asur. He said, yeah, Rav Sheshes holds it's asur, and I hold it's mutter. So now the Gemara gets into, okay, what specifically is the case of their machlokes? They're arguing over, is there an isser eshes ach on 2 brothers who converted? So the Gemara says as follows. If they are, the first version says, if they are brothers only from the father's side, not from the mother's side, they only share a father, there's no machlokes. Everybody agrees that the fact that they're brothers from the father doesn't make them considered to be brothers at all, and therefore there's no isser eshes ach. Because as far as the goyim are concerned, the akum are concerned, you don't know who the father is, you don't know who was mazana with who, and therefore you have no reason to create an isser here. There's also no reason to make gzeira to mix it up with Yisrael, because everybody knows there's no fatherhood in the world of the akum. Now, if they're only brothers from the mother's side, there it's clear that they are brothers, and therefore there it's aser. Either Gzeira that Yisrael will be involved, or we do consider them to be brothers to some extent if they share a mother. Question is, what happens when they share a father and a mother? Do people look at it as if they are sharing a father? Do they identify them as brothers from the father, or do they identify them as brothers from the mother also? So that's what this machlokes is. The one who holds that they are mutter, so that would be Rav Acha bar Yaakov. He says people identify them as brothers from the father, and therefore people think of them as not being brothers halachically, and they won't get confused to come to permit two brothers that are Yisraelim. Now, Rav Sheshes says it also says no, people also identify them as brothers from the mother, and there they are convinced there is brotherhood, and therefore you have to make Gzeira. That's all the first version. Second version says that Rav Acha bar Yaakov argues even in the case where they're only brothers from the mother. And he would also say that even if they're brothers from the mother, where everybody knows that they do have a brotherhood, he still says it's mutter. And it's because the issue over here is not just an issue of the fact that there's no brotherhood to an akum. It's also an issue it's also an issue of the conversion. So when a person converts, it's katan shenolad dami, even someone who's definitely his brother, that brotherhood relationship ends. So according to the first version, it's not a question of Gershon is Geyer, that the brotherhood ends when they convert. It's a question of, are they brothers? They were born as brothers as akum. Are they brothers? So we say the mother's brother, that the brotherhood to the mother is strong, the brotherhood to the father is weak. The question is, how do you identify it if they have both? Which one is the dominant? According to the second version, it's about the conversion. Does the conversion end the brotherhood relationship or not? Either way, the Gemara wants to bring a proof from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Yerushin is Gairu, that if a woman converts and takes her sons with her, so there's no chalitza and there's no yibum. That seems to imply that it's usher for them. It says, don't do chalitza yibum. There is no yibum chalitza. That seems to imply that it's usher for them to do yibum. That seems to say that there is an iser Eshes Ach. So if you're saying that there's an Isser Eshes Ach, so that's a clear proof to Rav Sheshes, they're Usser, even though they converted. So no, that's not what it's saying. It's not saying that there's an Isser Eshes Ach, it's just saying there's no mitzvah of Chalitza. They're as permitted as anybody else. Anybody else could marry the sister of one once he dies, the other brother can, anybody else can. There's no Isser, there's no anything. Everything is fine. So says there's a problem with that, and that's because the Mishnah says afilu. Even in the case where the only thing that happened, shalei b'kedusha, was the conception of the first brother, even there you still say this halacha. There's no conversion. Now, there's no yibum. Now, if you want to tell me that, it's telling me that it's aser, so I understand why that's an afilu. The filu is, even though the first one was conceived shaloi b'kedusha, the second one was conceived b'kedusha, so it's almost like they have different mothers. One was conceived by a mother who was a goy, one was conceived by a mother who was a Yisrael. Still, we view them as brothers, and there is an Isser Eshezach between them. That I understand. But if you want to tell me that there's no Isser, we're just saying there's no mitzvah of Yibum, so why is it a bigger chiddush that there's no mitzvah of Yibum when one was conceived b'kedusha, one was conceived shaloi b'kedusha? Either way, they're not considered brothers, and there's no mitzvah of Yibum. The opposite is true. They're even less brothers. There certainly shouldn't be a mitzvah of Yibum. So the Gemara says no. When it says afilu, it's focusing on the other fact. The fact that they both were born b'kedusha. Both were born b'kedusha is more likely to confuse them with Yisrael. And you may think you should make a gzeira that they should have to do Yibum. Otherwise, people will say that two brothers or Yisraelim don't have to do Yibum because they really look like Yisrael. So the chiddush is that they don't have to do Yibum. That's the afilu. And this is the first version of this conversation. According to the second version, we first wanted to bring this as a proof from that the pshat and the afilu is the second way, that it's only talking about the fact that there's no yibum. And then we said, no, maybe the pshat is to say that they're actually aser, and it's referring to the fact that that it's viewed as two separate mothers, and still you say that there isn't an iser. There is an iser. Okay, says the Gemara, I'm going to bring you a proof from another brisa, whether or not there is an Isser Eshes Ach on two brothers who convert. So the brisa talks about three cases of brothers. One is where they were both born as Goyim and they converted. Another one, the second case is where they were conceived as Goyim but born as Yisraelim. The third case is where they were born as Yisraelim. So the third case is easiest. They're born as Yisraelim. They have the regular halacha of Yisraelim, and therefore they have an Isser, they have mitzvah Yibum, they have an Isser Eshezach. The first case, where they were born as Goyim, they were conceived and born as So the Mishnah here is actually our Brisa is referring to where they were twins, it says, so there's no question of who the father is. They both definitely share a father and a mother. Still, it says there's no mitzvah of yibum, and there's no mitzvah of chalitza, because once they converted, it's kekaton shenola dami. There's also no chiyuv of eishes ach. That means that if they do have via with each other's wives, they don't have to bring a carbon, they're not chayav kares because of eishes ach, and the reason is, of course, because they're kekaton shenola dami. Now, if, however, they were conceived b'kedusha, conceived shalei b'kedusha, and born b'kedusha, so now we view them as if they don't have any shaychus to their father. The father's only contribution was the conception, and he was an akum at the time. He was an akum. They were conceived by an akum. They're not misachas to the father. They don't share a father. Since they don't share a father, there's no mitzvah of yibum. Mitzvah of yibum only goes to brothers to the father. However, the mother, her connection to them goes by the birth. She carried them through to the birth, and they were b'kedusha at that time, so they do share a mother. Therefore, there is a chiyuv if they were to. There is a chiyuv eishesach on each other's wives. So the Gemara here says that this is a proof that there is no iser eishesach on two brothers who convert, because it says. The Gemara says the opposite. The Gemara says there is an iser eishesach because it says there's no chiv carbon, no chiv kares, but the iser is there. That's the implication. It's only that there's no chiv. So Gemara says no. When it says that there's no chiv carbon, it means that there's even no iser. The reason it didn't say there's no iser is because in the next case we're going to talk about carbon. We're going to say that there is a chiv carbon. So here we say there's no chiv carbon, but there's no iser either.